We're grateful that Uncle Colin Hunter, an elder of the Wurundjeri, is able to be present today to speak for this country. Uncle Colin, thank you very much for being with us. Please come now to offer your welcome to country. Thank you.
Excuse me. Yeah, thank you. Look, I'd like to start off by acknowledging that this afternoon we are meeting on the lands of my ancestors, the Wurundjeri people, and I'd like to take this opportunity to pay my respects to my ancestors and to my elders, both past, present and emerging, elders from all nations, but I particularly want to pay my respects to everyone gathered this afternoon. But as always, I'd like to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us. I'd like to acknowledge you, Arnie, over there. Long time no see. I won't go through you. Glenn over the back, yourself. So I want to acknowledge you and pay my respects to you and your families. Wominjeka, welcome. Wurundjeri Balak, Yemen Kondi Big. The Wurundjeri people welcome everyone to land today. Wurundjeri, no, Budambor War, Kondi Nengnak, Dubadan Big Bulik Bor Tilikan. The Wurundjeri people want you to look after and protect the land as they did long before. Wurundjeri country extends from the inner city of Melbourne. It goes across the mountains of the Great Dividing Range, west to the Werribee River, south to the Mordialloc Creek and east to Mount Borbor. And the Wurundjeri people are part of the Kulin Nation and of the Wurrung language group. Hello, my name is Colin Hunter Jr. or Woolert, meaning possum. A name given to me by my grandmother as a young boy. I'm a proud and passionate 7th generation Wurundjeri man and a direct descendant of Bibijan, who is Nullangeta or head of the tribe at time at first settlement. And it's through my grandmother, Gumbriar, meaning white dove, or only tiny, or Nana, she was known to us mob, that I've got Aboriginal culture and heritage in my life today, so for that I say thanks, Nan. My grandmother was one of the last of the Aboriginal people born in the early 1920s, up at Corranderk Mission in Healesville, before she got pushed up to Barham on the river in New South Wales. In Aboriginal culture, a great deal of respect is given to the land, the plants and animals alike. And it's been a while, we've been locked up in COVID at home, and it's, I think this is only the 4th welcome I've done in front of people for, nearly 2 years. I was just saying to Arnie this morning, I had the best tickets in town. I had the Melbourne Cup, but I was home by 11. But so I've got my beautiful gummies, and I'm going to just place them up the back of the room, and if you get an opportunity as you're moving around this afternoon, just take a nice one and put it in your pocket for the afternoon of the day, please. The significant sales will keep you safe along country and give you the access to the resources while you're on country. And while you're on Wurundjeri country, you're most welcome to the traditional lands and the waterways of the Wurundjeri people. So Wominjeka, welcome. Look, I won't say much more, but what a great idea, an Indigenous learning centre. I have a lot to do with Melbourne Transitional School down in Richmond there, MITS down there, and young Ed Tudor, young white fellow I know there, has been down there, and I've been involved with MITS now for about, probably since its inception, and it was great. We had a swimming class over at, I think it was at one of the pools in the city of Yarra the other day, and we had 19 of the kids from MITS turn up, so it was just, amazing, So hopefully, that's a model that they can take across the country, because there is a lot of, but I always say to people when you're going to start an Indigenous study school or what I always say, because when I first went down to MITS, I said, how many Wurundjeri kids you got here? I said, none. I said, look, it's all fine, to go aim up at the top end. I said, but I'll just take you down to Collingwood or Dandenong. And there's plenty of kids that need that support, So it's just one thing to keep in mind. I think that, we're on Wurundjeri country, so try to look after some of our kids down in this state, because there's, you're looking at, as I was saying, I've got my report, we're supposed to go to council tonight, and you look at the closing gap statistics, kids out of home care, it's doubled in the last 10 years. It's just crazy. So look, anything you can do to support the community, I'm so grateful for. So good luck with your endeavours. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Uncle Colin, and your wise words and your fine words of welcome. And yes, we know Edward and we know Mitz, and they're doing a wonderful job. Good to get that update. Professor Peter Sherlock, our Vice-Chancellor, has been a champion for the inclusion of Indigenous programs in the university for many years now. Peter, please come and share with us something of what this day represents for you and for our university. Professor Sherlock.
Aunties and uncles, Chancellor, distinguished guests, friends and colleagues, it's a real privilege to be here today. As you can see, the gathering's a bit smaller than we would have liked, but we're paying our respects to COVID as well while we're here to try and keep everyone safe. And I know there's a lot of us watching online. Uncle Colin, thank you so much for your welcome, and I hope we can do justice to what you've said to us today today and in the years going forward. There are a number of apologies we've had for today from many church leaders and others, and I want to acknowledge their support, but I'd also like to open with a word of thanks. The main idea for this event today, for the creation of a School of Indigenous Studies at the University of Divinity, came from 4 people gathered in my home a bit over a year ago, 2 years ago. It's hard to know in these times, I've lost track. So I want to thank Gary Deverell, Naomi Wolf, Mark Brett and Gabrielle McMullen for their support and leadership in coming up with the ideas that have brought us to this moment today. I also want to thank the many aunties and uncles and people in community and mob who have counselled us, told us when to do things differently, been prepared to engage over the last couple of years. And I'd also like to thank the many generous donors who have given funds that have made it possible to take this step, and also thank members of the University Council for their support as well. So why are we here? It's because theology is the discipline in our world which has the greatest capacity to harm and the greatest capacity to heal. What theology does is it points us to the biggest possible truths, to the biggest picture. And guess what? You'd think theology would be more open to other different ways of seeing the world than those of the Western Enlightenment tradition. So that's why we're here. Some of you may think we're here for reconciliation. Well, we're not. Reconciliation, we're not ready for it yet. The white fellas like me haven't acknowledged enough of the truth that needs to be acknowledged, of the injustices that are yet to be remedied for us to start talking about reconciliation. Heck, we ain't even got a treaty yet, so it's pretty hard to reconcile something when you haven't even acknowledged that it's broken. But of course, those of us who are trained in theology in the room will know how God speaks about reconciliation in the Christian scriptures. That's the work that God does through Jesus, and it's an invitation to everybody, black fella and white fella, to engage in reconciliation, which means recognising how broken we are and how much we need truth and justice. So how broken are we? Well, it's pretty bad. We've been in this country as white fellas for over 200 years, and we're still working out how to do things differently. When you look at what's happened to community around the country and the price that they pay day by day for the presence of white fellas in this country, it's pretty bad. The separation of children, which we've heard talked about already from Uncle Colin, keeps going on. The custody, the prison rates, the joblessness, the health issues, the death rates. And then, of course, there's the lack of representation of Indigenous people in our churches and, of course, in our theological colleges and universities. So there's a lot that is broken. But there's causes for hope too, and that's also why we're here today, to acknowledge that things are broken and to hope for something better. So how did we get here? Well, we got here through a story of a whole pile of disconnects and the miracle of things coming together. My favourite disconnect is in this institution itself. Way back in 1910, somewhere in the centre of the city we now call Melbourne, a bunch of white fellas got together and said, we need Australian theology degrees for Australian clergy. Great idea, born out of the nationalism in the wake of federation. didn't kind of occur to people to say that maybe we might need Indigenous theological degrees for Indigenous people and that kind of leadership that it might bring. And you might say, well, it was 1910, they didn't know any better. The thing is, they did. The very first executive officer of this institution, my predecessor, was a chap called John Matthew, who was a Presbyterian minister, and he was appointed as the registrar of the Melbourne College of Divinity in 1910. And his job, and I'd say like it was about a day a week, was writing exam papers, getting them marked, and making sure all that academic quality was there. And he did a fantastic job of that for 14 years. But the thing is, those exam papers, well, it was New Testament, Old Testament, theology, church history, even comparative religion. But was there any attempt to engage with Aboriginal theology or spirituality? No. Well, you might have said, John Matthew, you should have known better. The thing is, he did. He'd lived in bush in the late 19th century alongside Aboriginal people for about 20 or 30 years. And he wrote it all up in a series of 4 books that are sitting up in my office between 1888 and 1924, when the institution gave him the degree of Doctor of Divinity, recognising him for his Indigenous religious studies. But John Matthew, the first executive officer of this university, couldn't connect the dots between what he was doing over here, writing about blackfellas. I wouldn't recommend you read it, it's not great stuff, but he had a go. And setting exam papers for white guys to learn their theology and become ministers. So that's our story and where we've come from. And it's taken us, it's our 111th birthday on Friday, the anniversary of our Act being passed by the Victorian Parliament. So we're a bit of a colonialist institution too. It's taken us 111 years to get to the first step to start undoing some of that. So this is an historic day, my friends, and there is cause for celebration. But I don't want us to over-egg the history in today. I'm an historian. So this is a first step on the road to something better. It's a first step into Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples coming together in what this university does best, theology, and saying it could be a whole lot better, richer, deeper, broader, more fruitful. It's just a first step in the road. The road ahead is really long. We're going to need those gum leaves. So the road ahead is long, and we've got our eye turned across our shoulder to see who's following us, to see whether we're getting it right, whether the elders and community are coming along with us and beside us and around us. So it's an historic day, but it's not that historic because country's still country and God is still God. We bring to this day a lot of hopes. Hopes that we might be able to do things better and differently, that new things might emerge, that heck, really ancient things might emerge and give their gifts to us. But I have a caution. We must not be imperialistic in the way that we think about how the School of Indigenous Studies operates. It's not the only thing that this university does in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander theologies and ministries and spiritualities. It's just a starting place. Lots of other activities will happen through the school and around it, and indeed in lots of other organisations, as they have already been happening. So let's not try to dominate the field or colonise it. Let's just do good things here and find all of those pathways for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples around Australia, wherever they're needed, to enter into the ministries, the vocations, the service, the health, the fruitfulness to which they and we are called. So why did we call it a school? We were talking a couple of years ago, it was a centre, we're going to have a centre. We're calling it a school because it's about education. And it's not actually, primarily, I think, about educating Indigenous peoples. It's actually about educating us white fellas, because we need it. So what we're asking for in this school is to create an opportunity, yes, for Indigenous people to learn, to have access to theology, to be trained up and prepared for ministries, which most of them are already exercising day by day in a pretty broken world. But it's also a place for them to teach white fellas like me about what God might really mean for country, about who we are called to be in this land together. So it's a school, and if you're thinking it's a primary school, yeah, it is for us white fellas, but it's not for you black fellas. Finally, I want to think about our hopes today in the spirit of gift. Everything about this School of Indigenous Studies is about a gift. It's God's gift to us. It's a gift from Indigenous people to non-Indigenous people. It's a gift that we're needing to give to if it's going to flourish and produce fruit. And the gifts are going to come from surprising places. I spent about 4 hours on a Zoom seminar that Sam Kirkpatrick set up last week, listening to 1-2 Patrick talk, and I was like, I have no idea what this guy's saying. And then about 90 minutes in, I was like, oh yeah, this really is starting to make sense. You know, I'd never thought about it like that. And of course, what was he talking about? He was talking about gifts. So the gifts come to you from surprising places. All we need to do is to be open to them. The final thing I'd like to say is that the main commitment why today is an historic moment is because if the School of Indigenous Studies works, and I pray and hope that it does, and it may turn and flourish and become something else that we haven't seen yet, I hope that from today on we never again have to say that at the University of Divinity, theology is about a bunch of white fellas doing God talk on stolen land. It's time to change that story. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice-Chancellor. The newly appointed chair of the committee, which will oversee and guide the work of the School of Indigenous Studies, is the Reverend Auntie Janet Turpie-Johnstone. Auntie Janet has a great deal of experience with the running of parishes, university Indigenous support units and Aboriginal controlled organisations. We are fortunate indeed that she has accepted our invitation to help with the school. Auntie Janet, thank you very much. Please come and share something of your vision for the school with us now.
Wabinjika, Colin, thank you. From the soles of my feet, to hear something of your story, to hear more about the Wurundjeri people, but to hear more about our country. Can never stop listening, and I trust never stop hearing. Thank you. I would like to acknowledge the lands on which we are standing, the lands of tens of thousands of years of history, but I'd also like to acknowledge country itself. The research that I'm doing is opening up to what I consider to be some of the most heartbreaking stories about what has happened to country over the past 200 years, and is continuing to happen. So I'd like to acknowledge our rivers, our forests, our creatures, and may each one of us at some point begin to stop and reflect what country really means, not just to the past, but to the future. Waminjaka, thank you. Well, I stand up here absolutely empty-headed, and the reason I don't have notes is I have eye issues. To be reading notes, I'd have to be down with a magnifying glass listening to them. So I just thought I would wing it, but being appointed as chair is a very interesting thing to a whole new endeavour and having no idea what to do next. How's that? So let's just hope that together we can journey through this. And I'm sure we will be. I will be depending on a lot more people than just me. When I did theology way back, how long ago was that? Cave times, really. It was cave times. The early 90s, oh, was it? Peter, it was cave times. Because there were about 3 lecturers out of all my whole, how many years I took to do it, that had any kind of sympathy. I know when I was selected to be a priest, I had people make fun of me. You're only being selected because you're token. And then I can remember a couple of, when we had to do sermons, practice sermons on Friday, and I remember coming back at the text from our direction, reading Luke's gospel from that, the little paragraph about the women, talking about what has happened to Aboriginal people via the text and tradition. I nearly got kicked out of the university. It was a very interesting moment. How dare I turn the text over on itself? And I look back with great grief and think about that Evan Burge was one of them. I don't know whether any of you remember the late Evan Burge. Such compassion, such understanding that there are multiple ways of coming at text and tradition. And those that hold the text and tradition in their hands must be open to those that come from other perspectives. It was never written or concretised by the people that created it. It was never held in any kind of formula by those who were actually the participants in it. Those that participated in those stories and those that then in later times reflected back on those narratives, never at any point did they put concrete poles down and say, this is the rules and that's all there is to it. So when I think about a new theological school and the questions that we were asking, 30 years ago nearly, 20-something years ago, the questions that I'm sure Aboriginal people have been asking ever since 1788, when the colonists came and said, your ways aren't good enough, our ways are better. And yet when I look around country, I know they were wrong. If you can't live with country, and if your text and tradition cannot read country appropriately, then it's wrong. If it sets out to destroy a people and to destroy country, then it's wrong. And I will never, ever get over that hump. And I will never apologise for it. I know when I was finished, a whole nother interesting story, but I can remember when I finished in the parish work and slammed the door and thought I'll never go back. Not to the parish. I think the parish work was one of the best jobs anybody could ever have. Journeying with a community of people through all life's phases is so precious. From birth to death, you hold these people's hands and you help tell their stories. But the institution itself has an immense amount, I consider, growing up to do. But how dare I talk to, the blue stone? The feminists used to say we're the white ants coming up through the floor. I think we Aboriginal people are that which is melting the mortar between the bricks. But I'll never forget looking back and thinking, a job that I found so much personal satisfaction in, but the institution itself kept telling me that I had no place there, was fascinating. But it drove me into what I'm now very immensely thankful for, back into the Aboriginal community, to develop organisations that now are standalone organisations that have their own identity and have a voice back to both government and back to the broader community. And that in itself is a remarkable gift, because these are voices that are now being listened to. Not just the people like us that created them or those that established the governance, the community itself has a voice back to both the institutions that have looked down on them for so long. So when I did leave, and I can remember thinking what theological education had meant to me, and I'll always remember how thankful I was, because it technically was the years I think I woke up. There is some kind of academic thing inside me that had been slumbering for so long, and that at least through the MCD and through the UFT, the United Faculty of Theology, I learnt something about myself, but also something about the capacity to read text and tradition from multiple perspectives. That these voices must not be silenced, and we must risk the gaps that are between us. And I know how heartbroken I was to think that I'd been silenced, that I was a naughty little girl. How dare I challenge the Institute? And I know I've said that to several people when I sort of felt like I'd been pushed out of the church, that I was a naughty little girl. My fingers needed to be smacked, and it's a feeling that has not gone away. I trust that as our institutions and in this particular institute does not ever find itself in that place, that it does see itself coming from the earth first, from our feet, that we look to where our feet are standing and honour the very ground on which our feet are anchored, and never forget. I would totally disagree with Stephen Hawkins, who said we must look to the stars. Never look to our feet, but look to the stars. I'm sorry, Stephen, I think we need to be looking to our feet a lot more than we ever have over the past 300-400 years with the Industrial Revolution and the things that we are now doing to this planet. And theology has a huge part to play in that. For the very word spirit means breath. The very thing that connects you and I to the creatures and to the trees is our breath. The very thing that brings us back to who we are and who we're meant to be, particularly in a divine sense, is our very breath. The very thing that makes us both humble and also I think, adds to some of our, how can I put it, the arrogance of some of our generations and some of our, well, colonialism to start with. An invasion that comes and turns people and country into something other than what it was meant to be. I lay that out as a landscape, as a place where the rivers flow and the trees are planted and the koalas and the kangaroos come to play and the possums and all those little creatures, all those other birds, as Melbourne was once a place where there were zillions of birds and creatures and trees. It's no longer that now. It's a place where only humans gather. So I lay the sense of the tension of what it means to be an Aboriginal person, coming from country, to lay that landscape out as part of your dreaming and to not forget it. That the very steps you take upon this planet are the very steps that belong to every other creature that's ever existed. This is not ours. And that as a theological college, that with every breath this college takes, with every word it speaks, with every sentence it teaches, with every assessment it marks, may it never forget that if we want to talk about God, I can remember one of my first years, Old Testament it called it, and I decided then and there that it was the Hebrew text and the Christian text. I decided I'm sick of this. The Hebrew text, still a very viable text. It deserves to stand alone. And in one of those theological things where everybody's outwitting each other about who could be the smartest and who understood the Hebrew and who didn't. And I'm a new kid on the block, and I said, gee, if you turn the word God around, it becomes dog. And I remember John Wright looked at me and he said, you're right. That sense of humility, that sense that somewhere in the gap between what colonialism has brought and what has been imposed upon this country and its peoples, somewhere in there is a place where this school hopefully will fit and start to reweave the stories, retell them, and risk what that may cost. Wominjaka, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, Auntie Janet. It was some very challenging things for us to hear. Naomi Wolf is one of our 2 School of Indigenous Studies staff and the local Dean for NAITS, an Indigenous learning community, one of our key partners in this enterprise. Naomi has been working with the university since 2016, laying the groundwork for all that we celebrate today, especially by leading the 2017 consultation with elders that set our direction in a fairly fundamental way. Thank you, Naomi, for all your hard labour on our behalf. Please come now to bring us greetings from NAITS.
Hello everyone. Thank you, Uncle Colin, for the welcome. We are always mindful that as someone who's a Trallaway woman, who's Yanabul, a visitor to country, we thank you for that. I bring blessings and greetings from NAITS, the International Indigenous Theological Community. And Uncle Terry sends his apologies, but I'm not quite sure of the time difference. I think it's 15 hours, but it's in the middle of the night, I think, in Halifax. Maths is not my strong point, that's why I don't teach it. But I bring special greetings and blessings to you, Auntie Janet, as the new chair, and you have our love, and obviously we have a long history of working with you. And we know that the job of the chair is to bring together 2 different worlds and all of that, what it means. So you have our prayers. A special greeting to you too, Gary, Cuz, and love from the community. We know the hard work that goes into operating in this space. We know the difficulties of being in this space as you navigate what it means to be an Indigenous theologian in a Western institution. Special greetings to Graham and to Peter. We are in awe that we have come this far. There are many in the community that said it would never happen. And we are happily proving them wrong, that this is a partnership, that this is a journey of challenges, but of great, great successes. Our graduates, the government speak of success. But for us, it's the development of community. It's the development within a space that fully acknowledges that this is contested space, that this is difficult space, but it is a space where we come where all of us are respected. We don't always agree, but we're respected. And that is something that is missing from every other institution. So let us celebrate that. Our students and our elders and community members right across the world, wherein we have formalised programs in New Zealand, Australia, Canada and the United States of America, and we grow each year because the Spirit is warmly received and grows. Because communities find themselves in a space where they are finally welcomed. For many of our elders, they talk about the times in the past where they couldn't be fully who they were, fully Christian and fully Indigenous. And indeed, if I think back to conversations with my own dear dad and my own grandmother, that was never possible. And I know there's others whose families and lived experiences are the same. So to come to 2021 with all of the COVID challenges and everything else, to have a space where students can study both in a community sense and in a formalised sense and be fully who they are, fully Christian, fully Indigenous. So thank you. We look forward to working alongside the School of Indigenous Studies and the university and all of its colleges and all of the many facets and in all of the ways that the Spirit encourages us to move and to grow and to build new things, new hope for the ancestors of the future, both yours and mine. This is a happy day. Let's celebrate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naomi. The Reverend Dr. Gary Deverell is the other member of our School of Indigenous Studies staff. Having participated in the consultation of 2017, Gary last year formed a committee to develop a model for the school, which he and Naomi then took back to community elders and colleges of the university for discussion and approval. Ultimately, the University Council signed off on that model just a few weeks ago. Gary will come now to offer a prayer of thanksgiving for all that has graced our work to this point. Thank you, Gary.
It's good to see all the mob in the room and all the mob online. Really good to share this day together. But let us now give thanks to our Creator, saying, "With earth, sea and sky," to which I'd invite the response, "We give you thanks and praise." With earth, sea and sky, we give you thanks and praise. Let us pray. Creator God, whose breath is in our nostrils and whose spirit rises up from the country beneath our feet, today we give you thanks for this new beginning for our university. We give thanks for First Nations people who dreamed of this day and worked tenaciously over many years and decades to make the dream a reality. We give thanks for allies amongst the immigrants and settlers who have come to this land, allies who caught the vision and covenanted to share in its making. God, our Creator, with earth, sea and sky, we give you thanks and praise. God of Jesus, our ancestor, elder, and brother, we give you thanks for giving us the law you wove into the fabric of country, the law of our kinship with all living things, the law of our responsibility to care for all living things. We give you thanks that students who study at this university will be able to learn your law, not only from sacred books, but also now from sacred country and the people who have tended it from the beginning of creation. God, our Creator, with earth, sea, and sky, we give you thanks and praise. Creator Spirit, breath of life and holy fire, we thank you for meeting us here on this holy ground to make us your friends. Fill us and all who will engage with our new school with yourself. Make us lovers of God, prophets of country, sages of life in all its beautiful colours and hues. Keep those of us who teach close to the ground, with our roots deep in country, that we may be humble to listen for the life-giving voices of our ancestors. Bless all who come to learn. Open their hearts and their minds to the transformation you would make in their hearts and our world. God, our Creator, with earth, sea, and sky, we give you thanks and praise. In this Advent season, Creator God, we find that our hearts are restless for justice. In your mercy, come to teach us what justice actually means, what it looks and tastes and smells and sounds like, that your sovereignty may finally take root in our world and grow to maturity. God, our Creator, with earth, sea, and sky, we give you thanks and praise. Amen.
Thank you very much, Gary. Thank you. And thank you, everyone. Those gathered in the room, as well as online through the live stream, for joining with us today as we celebrate this historic beginning for the University of Divinity. It's wonderful that you can share it with us. I acknowledge and thank the elders who have been able to join us today: Uncle Colin Hunter, Auntie Sherry Balcombe, the Reverend Auntie Janet Turpey-Johnston, the Reverend Canon Uncle Glenn Luffrey, and Auntie Pearl Wimara. Thanks also to those who will serve on the School of Indigenous Studies Committee: the Reverend Auntie Janet, the Reverend Uncle Glenn, the Reverend Canon Victor Joseph, Auntie Sherry, the Reverend James Winderlick, Dr. Joanna Cruikshank, Professor Shirley Swain, and Professor Mark Brett. They will have their very first gathering at 2 p.m. in the seminar room opposite reception. I acknowledge and thank the heads of our partner churches, religious orders and colleges for joining with us today. The university thanks you all sincerely for your support and help. Some of those who have joined us today are also very substantial donors to the Indigenous Theology Fund, which ultimately provides the cash we need to run the school. Thank you from the bottom of our collective hearts for believing in what we're doing and acting to make the dream a reality. Of course, if there is anyone else present who would like to become a financial supporter of the school, you can now make a donation via our website or calling the university. All gifts, donations warmly welcomed. And finally, we say farewell to everyone who has joined us via the live stream and invite those in the room here to join us for refreshments. Meg Nelson is also prepared to take interested guests on a brief tour of the new facility here at St. Pascal's. Thank you and good afternoon.